All right, everyone, it's 2 o'clock here in the Eastern time zone, so it's the official start time for today's webinar. On behalf of STEER, we want to welcome you and thank everyone for your commitment to STEER and particularly for joining this webinar, a very timely webinar given what we have coming toward us in the coming days in the form of DORIAN. This is the first webinar that we're offering to support our virtual assessment structural teams, what we call the VAST. And this webinar is going to focus on the participation of our VAST in hurricane season preparations. So with that, we're going to begin with first some just appreciation. I'd like to first of all thank the National Science Foundation for their support of STEER, and also to recognize STEER's participation with the wider Extreme Events Consortium of organizations that have recently formed under NSF. We're all under the banner of Converge, and we're sharing knowledge and practice, coordinating right now with our friends at EARR, for example, in figuring out how to better respond to these events and support the community in this type of post-disaster reconnaissance. We'd also like to recognize the FULCRUM organization. FULCRUM has provided through their community platform a no-cost access to the mobile platform that we use for our damage assessments. We'll see some of that platform today. And most importantly, we'd like to thank all of you and your institutions because you're the ones volunteering and making great sacrifice to do this important work, and STEER would not exist without you. So with that, I'd like to just first of all overview our webinar. Today we're going to start with an introduction that I'll lead. I'll hand it off to David, who will go through our event response workflow. I'll come back and show you a little bit about how we issue and prepare our reports in STEER. And then our second David will come and talk about data enrichment and quality control. We'll close with question and answer. Not sure if Ian was able to join us. He's traveling, and if not, Dave Pravat will help facilitate that. But by the end of this webinar, we hope you'll walk away with 4 things: an understanding of our VAST, these virtual assessment structural teams, and our event responses, understanding the workflow for event responses and the kind of products we're generating, a working knowledge of how we make our reports and preparations, and also looking at how we enrich data following events and put it through a rigorous quality control process. So before we get into the content, we would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar, and for sound quality, it's really important that everyone who's not speaking at this time, please mute yourself. For all participants, as well as speakers who are not speaking yet, please take a moment to mute. That's either done through your Zoom interface on your web browser by clicking the microphone to the mute setting. Or if you're joining us by phone, if you type *6, that will mute your line by phone. You could also just mute your phone directly using whatever interface your hardware provides. Also, if at any point during this webinar you have a question or something that pops into mind that you'd like to contribute, feel free to enter that into the chat window. Our chat window feature can be accessed in the little kind of bubble format that you see here. If you click that bubble icon, it will bring up a chat window and you can place your comments or questions there. And those items should be tagged to say everyone so that we all can see the comments of one another. All right, so with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to STEER. So STEER's vision is to build societal resilience by generating new knowledge on the performance of the built environment. And our efforts to do so really focus on building up the capacity of the natural hazards engineering community, as we broadly define it, to conduct this kind of work. And we do this through a 3-pronged strategy. The first is capacity building, which is all about creating standards and best practices and training to improve our ability to do this kind of work. The second is around coordination. STEER is able to get access to these areas much more quickly and efficiently than a traditional rapid grant might, for example. And our process creates what we believe are very impactful event responses. And finally, we're collaborating in a new and ambitious way in that we're building teams on the fly from across our community, and we're engaging researchers, practitioners, and policymakers in these efforts to accelerate the learning from disasters. Now, ultimately, if we do our job well, we're going to create an organization that can self-sustain because we've created capacity and standards under which we all can operate in a coordinated way to collaborate in ways we never imagined before. So getting us started is this team of 5 individuals. These are the 5 original PIs on the 2-year EAGR award, and we're in year 2 of that award. And our job is to design and launch STEER. And we're still very much in a startup mode, and we're just starting to kind of get our feet under us. It's been a busy first year. But these 5 individuals who comprise directors associated with the different types of hazards, as well as some important themes like data standards, are all working to help lift this organization off the ground. And what we're doing now is bringing the community into this effort more intentionally through the working groups that we're going to start forming this year, as well as a steering committee to help set the vision and leadership for STEER going forward. And we'll be growing in our offerings of things such as webinars like this and other training opportunities. So we thank you for your patience. It's a tough startup, but these 5 individuals have, I think, done a great job in helping position us to now start bringing you all in more actively as STEER becomes a community-based organization. Now, our community, we'd like it to be very broad. As I said before, it's not just academics. We want public and private sector to be a part of our efforts, government, nonprofit, and the public at large. They're the ones most impacted by these events. And so we want to create a broad umbrella for STEER and bring these people in the appropriate ways. Another thing that STEER would like to do is make sure that we carefully target the types of events that are of most interest to our field. And our field looks at structural damage to the built environment. And we tend to focus on the types of hazards that create dynamic effects. For us, that falls into the category of windstorms like tornadoes and hurricanes, as well as earthquakes and tsunamis. And that means that STEER would not be as inclined to respond to things like a wildfire or inland flooding, but rather focus on these core hazards shown here. Another important distinction that we'd like to make is the difference between a STEER response and the rapid or other reconnaissance efforts. First of all, STEER does not entertain individual research questions or hypotheses per se. So we're not the organization you come to when you have a question you want to pursue through reconnaissance. Rather, our job is to get in early and efficiently in a strategic and coordinated fashion to collect and curate high quality perishable data that shows the damage to the built environment in a given event. So we're going to create our mission objectives and sampling targets accordingly to make that a very efficient and impactful process. But we're not going to go deeper than that to explore certain follow-on questions that original data might expose. Our goal instead is to get that data, make it high quality, and then get it curated as quickly as possible along with these reports that we issue so that STEER can then enable others to undertake research using that data, and also for other rapids and reconnaissance efforts to use what we found in our early days in the field to inform what they do going forward. And so NSF, for example, might take STEER recommendations from our missions and use those to guide how they might allocate rapid funding, for example. So it is important to distinguish that STEER is not the only way to do this research. The rapid and other agencies exist. At NSF, the rapid and other agencies exist to provide follow-on funding to probe deeper based on STEER findings. Now, STEER organizes its membership in 2 categories, and we recruit structural engineers or others in related fields of natural hazards engineering, those are shown in the orange box, to come onto these virtual assessment teams we're talking about today, or the field teams that deploy. We also are recruiting data scientists because we would like to automate our workflows as much as possible in the future, and so those folks in the green box would be a separate working group that we're hoping to form. But for those of you who are in the orange colors in the VAST and FAST categories, you were assigned a membership level when you joined STEER that was from level 1 to 4. The level 1s don't have any prior field experience and haven't really participated in STEER much yet, so they're going to be encouraged to participate in our virtual teams to get started. Our level 2 members, they also have not been in the field really, but they have been active in our VAST, and as a result, they can continue to be VAST active, but we would also encourage them to apply to be what's called a FAST trainee. That is somebody who's not yet been to the field, but is now ready to deploy using one spot on the field team to train such a person under the mentorship of more experienced personnel. Now, those experienced personnel are level 3 and 4s. They all have significant prior field experience. The level 3s have a little bit less, and they would generally be just a member of a FAST team. They could also be on the VAST if they like, and they can also be in our working groups. The level 4, though, is the individual with a lot of past field experience, and those individuals could lead a field assessment team. They're also invited to be on our VAST always and our working groups, but they may even be a member of our steering committees or have a regional node to help launch STEER responses across the US and perhaps even globally. So every year we will assign and update membership levels as our members move through their training and experience and qualify for event responses. So with that, I'd like to now make a transition over to Dave Pravat, who will talk a little bit about what an event response really looks like. David?
All right, we start with active monitoring of events now in Puerto Rico, and looking at major hazards. As we said, we will start with major hazard events that have little structural impact, where no VAST or FAST is required. We might issue just an event briefing. Going up in stages, if a major hazard event is likely to cause some structural impacts, we may activate a VAST, and the ultimate goal would be to produce a preliminary virtual reconnaissance report that we do essentially from our desktops and looking at the information that's available. In the case of Hurricane Dorian, which is suggested to be either Hurricane Category 3 or 4 hitting the east coast of Florida, here we would probably initiate both a VAST as well as a FAST requirement to go about and get that data. All of this work is coordinated with the other emergency reconnaissance groups, as Tracy said, and we will be working in conjunction with them going forward. Okay, so today we are actually going to be issuing, and you will receive an email fairly shortly if you haven't done so already, about the enrollment for the VAST and possibly for the FAST as soon as that gets kicked off. What does that mean? That gives you an opportunity to apply for and say whether you're available and at what level of involvement that you're able to make. And certainly the idea would be, as you assign yourselves to these, either the VAST or the FAST, you will be now engaged in monitoring the track of this hurricane and helping us and everyone else know where the hurricane is going to come on shore, and looking at the logistics, etc., for getting yourselves to the location. Okay, so basically from the event, once we have an event, and in this case we're talking about the hurricane event, but imagine it couldn't be an earthquake or a tsunami. The event briefing is essentially something that we want to have out during the time that the event is still within an existing news cycle. And a 24-hour window is something that we have been able to do, and we would hope to achieve by utilizing many hands to make the work fairly light. Okay. After that, the compilation of the data from our vast virtual assessment survey teams, we would produce a preliminary virtual reconnaissance report within 2 or 3 days of the event. Now that report is not only good for us and our community, but it's also good for informing the folks who are actually going to be doing the field assessment, giving them a lay of the land as best as we can tell before we get into the actual deployment itself. Once in the actual deployment, the early access reconnaissance reports should be done within 2 to 3 days of us returning from that. And then a much longer and deeper process begins, which is a data enrichment and quality control process that really is the place where we have curated data that's stored for the majority of folks to use down the road. Okay, so generally the phases of our response, of the STEER response, are immediate, during deployment, and then these two post post-deployments and long-term deployments that we go there. It seems a bit complex right now, but at the bottom of the slide, you will see that we have the vast handbook reports and the data enrichment and quality control reports. These are really have been tried to delineate exactly what we do and how we do it. So therefore, a lot of the information that maybe might gloss over here, you should be able to get a handle on. Okay. All of the work, particularly in the starting at the post the event, will be coordinated using our Slack channel, and I'm assuming that everyone is on board with the Design Safe Slack channels currently, and they're able to find and access the information there. A lot of the logistics have to be coordinated there, rental cars, airlines, and so on, as well as getting equipment sent to the site that you might need from the NSF Rapid and other places of that nature. The immediate post-deployment area, what I would mention is that if you have ideas or wish to apply for rapid funding to go for hypothesis-driven research, that is a time that you will do that on your own, but utilizing, if you would like, the data reports, the EARR and the PVRR reports as your preliminary data that would be assigned to Design Safe. Of the many types of data collection tools that we have, the primary one is going to be the door-to-door damage assessment, whereby we individually go from one structure to the next using the FULCRUM app in our hands, and by far that involves the greatest amount of work on the field. So from the point of view of the VAST, then on the back end, you are going to be responsible for adding to, augmenting that, as well as data checking the quality control of that. Okay. In addition, the unmanned aerial surveys, some may be from the NSF Rapid EF, some may be personal, the street view cameras and the terrestrial scanning technologies are all available. And with that, I think it's back to Tracy.
All right, so I'll let you stop sharing and then I'll take over. All right, let's see if I can get us back in. All right, so now I'm going to take over and talk a little bit about report preparation. And so hopefully you should see the transition slide here. This is going to focus on the information that's currently contained in our VAST handbook on report preparation. Because we released 2 important reports as part of our responses, it was important for us to create some standards to help our members in this important duty. So before I begin with going through some of those details about how we coordinate to write these reports, I first just want to point out where you're going to find information. And that is all STEER members have been added to a shared drive in Google. A shared drive is different than a shared with me. So be sure to look for shared drives in your Google Suite. And then when you look under that, you should see one called STEER members. That's where we keep all the information and assets that you'll need to do your work in the VAST. Now, the resources folder that I've highlighted here becomes one of the important folders that contains information to support you. And what you'll find inside that folder is a folder designated for the VAST, subject of today's talk. By the way, there's another folder called webinars that will contain the recording to this webinar and the full slide deck. We'll post that within 24 hours usually as soon as we get the recording. But what we want to focus on right now are the resources that are inside this VAST folder. So inside this VAST folder, we have a whole library of resources to help support your work on a virtual assessment team. I'll call to your attention, first of all, the things shaded in blue here. The member guidelines you all reviewed when you became members. And the pair of handbooks that David just referenced, one kind of focused on this kind of pre-event and immediate post-event, which is our handbooks looking at reports. And then this data enrichment process, which takes much longer to get the data ready for curation. There's a separate handbook on that. So those two handbooks are key assets that you'll find in that report folder. In addition, in that report folder, you will find templates for the two major reports that we produce. We created these templates to make your job much easier when you're working under time constraints to get these reports out into our community. And the templates provide some language and standard and consistent formatting that helps keep our reports highly professional and high quality. And so you'll find those templates there. The other items that are not highlighted, just shown in white, are other things that you'll interact with during your work in STEER. We'll talk about some of those today, but there are additional resources to help guide you or resources you would use when you're working with a field team and authoring reports based on their observations. Now what I want to do is talk about when an event is happening. It's happening right now for DORIAN, so we're going to kind of step through what we would be doing as a virtual assessment team. The first thing that will happen is in this events folder, if you were to click on it in your Google Drive, you will see folders set up by year, and those contain all of the STEER responses to the events for that year. So if you click on 2019, here's all the events we've responded to so far, and I just created a DORIAN folder prior to this webinar. So those folders contain the event information and all the resources, including the reports that we're working on for that event. So that's the first thing to note. You will do your work and have your work housed in these Google directories. A template will be created, a copy of the template will be placed in the event folder for your event by the leader of your VAST team. So every VAST will have a leader, and the leader's job is to help guide this entire process, which is distributed across countries, time zones, and geographies. It's kind of an amazing thing, and it's all happening virtually, and so that lead is kind of guiding that process, and we'll set up templates for you to start working on. Now the templates, again, there are two major templates that we're going to focus on today. The first one we're going to be working on very soon for DORIAN, and it's called our Preliminary Virtual Reconnaissance Report, or the PVRR. Now this is based, as David said, on what's publicly available. Big emphasis here on using social media to determine, what's happened in this event. There is authorship on this particular document of all of the VAST members who contributed and anyone who provided editorial review. We disseminate this very widely, and the important thing to highlight, especially for those in academia, is the fact that this is curated on Design Safe with a DOI that you can cite, and so it's a citable resource. And the purpose of this report is our first assessment. It's done remotely, but it really does inform, as David said earlier, our decision whether we deploy a full field team to go look at this event. So the key resources you would use in this stage of the response are the template, the PVRR template, which again is in the Google Drive, and you would refer to this handbook on creating these reports to get more guidance on how to do it. Now, when we take a look at what is inside this template, I made a high-level summary here of the table of contents of a typical PVRR so you could get an idea of what we include in these reports. All of these sections that have an S with a circle, those are sections that we have standard language templated for, and we use that to kind of keep a consistent message for STEER. But you can see that the report goes through everything from the characteristics of the hazard to codes and construction practices, obviously the damage organized in different formats depending on the event, and damage to both buildings and infrastructure, as well as geotechnical issues that were noted. Other sections that I've highlighted in yellow tend to be really important ones. I think these are the quick summaries people tend to look at, so I like to emphasize their importance. Obviously, executive summary, but we also have a section on current conditions and access that summarizes what we know from our remote viewing of the current conditions on the ground. That's really important to inform anyone who's going out, including STEER members, of what they might expect when they arrive, and so this is a really important section. The other section that's important is section 8. That is our recommended response strategy. And that's where STEER is going to make a statement after reviewing all the work that you compile about whether it's appropriate now to deploy field assessment teams to go out and collect additional data on the ground. So this is a very important report, as David suggested, for underscoring what we need to do next, if anything. Now, some events don't have a field team. They stop there. But some events are significant enough that they continue. And if they continue, a field team is going to deploy, and we're going to issue then a second report through our VAST, and that's called the Early Access Reconnaissance Report, or the EARR. The approach to doing this is very similar. Both the template as well as the guidance in the handbook is very similar. I just want to highlight a couple key differences. Number one, there's a lot of content that you can take from the preliminary report and bring over, so we don't want to repeat that verbatim. What we want to focus on is any updates to losses, casualties, or other information that we can find online to augment what our field team is seeing on the ground. So we include that. We also bring in the FAST daily summary. Every day the field team will send in a daily summary to you as a virtual team describing what they saw at a high level. That's a great source of content to bring into this report. And the last is our FULCRUM records, actually looking at those and using it to author sections of the report. Now, authorship of this document does expand to include the field assessment team, so they get credit for their work. It's disseminated in the same way, and this is really the next big report because people look at this, we're often the first ones on the ground. So this is the first engineering assessment of what happened. Often, we're usually the first ones to publish, and it will highlight the research questions worthy of continued research through things like a rapid grant. We again have a template and handbook to support you in this effort. The sections of this report are going to be very similar to the PVRR, the preliminary report. Just a couple things that I want to highlight as differences. One is that, all of this in blue is all going to be based on what our teams observed instead of what's inferred from the internet and other sources. So that's going to be one of the important distinctions. The other distinction, again, is that this section, section 10, signals what are the unanswered questions that our field team has discovered and that are worthy of continued investigation by our community. So again, it sends a very strong signal. It's an important section and probably one of the things that NSF looks at when they review our reports. So the daily assessments or the daily summaries are going to come from your field assessment team. I want to just show you what you should expect when these come in. They're going to summarize for you who was on the team, where they went throughout the day, and what they observed in each locale that they stopped at. So these perfectly map to parts of your template and allow you to be writing those on the fly each night when these come in. They'll also summarize any access issues they ran into and make a recommendation as to whether further study is warranted based on things that saw there. So again, all mapping directly to sections you're working on in the early access reconnaissance report. You'll also note that they've been asked to include about 4 or 5 images that are noteworthy. So you've got pictures to immediately pull in with captions to start building the report. So this is meant to streamline your work and get our information aggregated as quickly as possible and into those documents. Now, the last thing I want to do with you before I hand it over is to actually let you see what it's like to interact with FULCRUM sitting at home as a virtual team member. So hopefully on my screen now you will see the FULCRUM interface. This is the desktop interface, and I have come into it, I've logged in, and I've gone to my Windstorm app, and now I'm seeing all the data that's been recorded in that app by surveyors across STEER. I can scroll through this and see in all the column formats all the information that's been gathered. You'll even see later on down the line images that have been captured and notes, etc. So this is everything that's been captured showing up in a tabular format. Now, what you may want to do is start filtering that because you're working on a particular event. So I might say I want to look at, and in the team effort, I have been assigned to look at a certain neighborhood, and I'm writing that part of the report. So I might apply a filter. Let's say that I'm working on Mexico Beach. I was doing Michael, let's say, and I can put that filter on. If you notice, the records drop down to about only 211 records are from Mexico Beach, and I can start seeing those. Now, let's say that I particularly want to look at the Mexico Beach records, but I want to look at the ones that are coming from a particular investigator. So I might say, like, okay, I want to take a look at the records that are coming from Dave Pravat, who just spoke to you. And now it's filtered down to the 30 records that David found, right, that he assessed. So now I can go and take a look at those particularly, and I can even drop down here and do a quick view, and I can see the record in detail. I can see where it's at. I can scroll down and start seeing what David noted. I can click on any of the pictures, and I can download them at high resolution here to include in the report if I see something that I think we should be including. And I can read through all his responses and his ratings and see what he was able to assess. Now, if I want to download David's data, I can actually click that download button right there, And I can take it out in a variety of formats, and I could run some additional analyses in a GIS package or in Excel to statistically look at the number of buildings damaged a certain way, amount of window loss or window damage or roof loss, etc. So this is a powerful platform for viewing data in near real time from the field team that you might use. I'm going to clear the filters and show you one other thing before I hand it off, and that is the map version of this view, which allows you to sort the data geospatially. If I click on this map, I was previously in the table view. If I go to the map view, it now looks like this. I can start zooming in on a geography that my team's working on today. I can do a split view that has the map plus the table. And as I zoom in, it's going to include only the pins that are in the area I zoomed in on. So as you can see, the number of records is dropping as I'm zooming in to a particular locale. And so if your team is dividing up the report sections by geography, this is a great way to zoom in on the geography you're working on and see what the records are. Click on the pin and see that record and work on it. And you can still filter using the filters as well to continue to hone in more. Excuse me. So with that, I'm now going to hand it over to David Roche, who's going to talk more about Fulcrum and our quality control process.
All right, thank you, Tracy. So let me grab the screen here and switch over very quickly. All right, and Tracy, can you just confirm that you see everything here?
Yeah, I can see your slides.
Perfect. All right, so as Tracy just went over and was talking about generating the reports, and that's one of the great ways that as a VAST member you can contribute to the mission of STEER and be involved in an event response. The second way that you can be involved, that's also extremely critical to the overall workflow and the mission of STEER, is this being a part of, or participating in this data enrichment and quality control process. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here and briefly highlight a few steps in it. Okay, so the basic idea with this is that as the FAST teams are on site, for efficiency, they're not going to fill out and define every single attribute of every structure that we might be interested in. They're going to hit the highlights, try to identify maybe the structural load path and a few other observations and move on. So the goal of the data enrichment and quality control process is to then take that raw field data, enrich it, validate it, standardize it, and then curate and publish it to Design Safe as a complete, accurate, and standardized data set that can be used by the broader structural engineering community. So this is an extremely important part of the process and really is going to enhance our ability to discover knowledge ultimately from this data. So we've organized this into a couple of logical, what we call stages. Okay, and so it starts with, this kind of breaks down the entire, as we call it, the DEXI process. So it starts with verifying the location of the record, okay, making sure that where that location or where that record is geolocated does actually represent the structure that it's intended. This can be especially important in areas where maybe you have limited connectivity, GPS may not be good, the cell signal may not be strong, and so, or the investigator wasn't able to locate it. And so this is critical to ensuring that we've got it correctly located and have the address and so on correctly associated with the record. Once you do that, then you move on to stage 2, which is essentially the bare minimum. And in some records, this may be as far as we go as the bare minimum, depending upon what other supplemental data sources we have. But this is going to be that we know the location's correct, we know what type of building it is, we know when it was built, if it's referring to a building. We have an overall damage rating that's been validated and verified that meets our standardized criteria and so forth. Then we move on to various stages of detail, these third and fourth stages that, again, we may or may not be able to do for every record, depending on what other data we have available to basically to supplement these records or to enrich the data that we from the field. And so this includes things like, bringing in things that define the exact building attributes, precisely defining damage ratios for each of the building components, perhaps even defining, the roof sheathing fastener types or exact connections in the load path based upon the field investigator's notes, things like that go into a lot more detail. And then that final stage 5 is once we've gone through, stages 1 through 4 or as far as we can with a given record, This then just provides an overall kind of a second check on the records to ensure, for example, the county is used consistently throughout, and maybe the investigator, maybe in one place it's initials, another place it's the full name, and so we standardize those. So it's just making sure that the entire data set is as complete and as standardized as we can. Okay, and notice the target time frame here. So generally, we want to be able to verify the location either in real time or very soon, within a week after the FAST deployment completes. And then these other stages are going to vary depending on, again, how quickly some of the other supplemental data becomes available in this process. Our goal is to have the complete data set curated, the DECT process completed, the data set curated within 2 months of the event. And as we improve the workflow and improve the training and have and get more people involved, I think that's certainly going to be feasible, and we can even do better than that. Okay, so when we do this, I've talked about some supplemental data sources. So what actually are those? Okay, I'm going to give a quick demonstration of these. Tracy just gave you an overview of FULCRUM. But in addition to the data that we have already contained in FULCRUM, we also are going to use county records, which include things like the roof cover, when it was built, maybe an effective year built, any retrofits or building permits that have been pulled for it, the area, and then some other basic details. It's also really helpful for validating the exact address and making sure that's inputted correctly. And then you get to these either structure from motion models or point clouds from either LiDAR or from UAVs, and I'll demonstrate that here in just a second. We also have NOAA aerial imagery, which is typically available very soon after an event. And then we also have a few seats for pictometry as well that we can use to get almost ubiquitous oblique views of any structure within the impacted area for major events, so something like a hurricane. For a tornado, we typically wouldn't have access to this. And then also, depending on whether we deployed the equipment or not, we might also have the street view panoramas as well. And I do want to note here that the street view panoramas that at least we have so far, as well as the structure from motion models that I'll be demonstrating, these are all provided through our friends at the NARI Rapid facility. Okay, so let me just pop over and do a quick demonstration of a few of these different things. Okay, so let me start with the street view. So the street view will be very similar to what you would interact with in Google. If you've used the Google Street View before, you'll have a map here that you can zoom in and out on. You'll have these blue dots that indicate a photo location, and you can click on any photo and it will pull up the panoramic associated with that you can scroll, or you can zoom around, you can zoom in and out, and so forth. And then similarly, you can also just advance and basically virtually walk down a street and help with the assessment. Okay. In addition to that, we also have the PIX4D, the structure for motion. Okay, and this is a very valuable resource if we do have the data redundancy of UAV flights also corresponding to door-to-door assessments. So within PIX4D, you would get a link to a given data set that would pull up a screen like this. And within this, we can either do a two-dimensional view here, or we can go to 3 dimensions and look at the full data set. And so one of the things I want to demonstrate it here once it pulls up here is the ability, since this is it's essentially a point cloud that you're interacting with, every point on here has a physical location. And so from that, we're able to do measurements. We're able to, for example, measure a roof slope, measure an area. I'm not sure why we are pausing here, but I may skip this and come back to it here in just a second if this continues to hang up. The other resource that we have that's similar to this is through DesignSafe, and this is Potri, the Potri viewer that we can also create and view data sets, and very similarly can measure angles and lengths and interact with the data sets here. And again, it gives us a way of capturing the context of the entire damaged area. Okay, another resource that you'll have available to you within FULCRUM that Tracy, as Tracy indicated earlier, is, for example, if we were to go to a particular area and let me find we were going into this area here. And I'm not sure why my connectivity is so slow right now, so I may have to pause some of these and come back to it. But notice you have the ability here to add a layer. Okay, and so in many of the areas that we are going to be doing this data enrichment and quality control process, you also have access to multiple layers. And so, for example, in this case, this is a Hurricane Michael. Okay, I can simply activate a layer, and this is good. You'll see it overlaid here. This is the same imagery that was captured by a UAV, but it's now available to you directly within FULCRUM. And so if I were to click on a record, I would get that same imagery, and again, I can toggle this on and off to help me define, for example, the roof cover damage or roof, the structure damage or what type of roof it is, etc. All right, so I'll come back to these maybe in a second if I can, but for sake of time, let me move on. And so by way of summary then, in completing this DEXI process, we rely upon a number of, again, these supplemental data sources. And they become available at different time frames. And so what that means then is the DEXI stage that we're able to complete really sometimes varies by when this data becomes available. So typically, the FULCRUM data is going to be synced almost in real time. Aerial imagery from NOAA is also typically available almost in real time, just a few days after the event. County records are also available. But things like the structure from motion, the 3D models, and the Street View camera, the platforms, those may not be available until several weeks or even a month. Pictometry is typically available 30 days after the event, and that's just a licensing limitation through pictometry. Okay, so that sometimes makes a difference then in terms of what stages we're able to complete with given records. Okay, so all of these data sources, whoever the VAST lead is for a given event, is going to be maintaining a list of these different data sources, which you will be able to then click on and pull up for a given area that you're going through this process, or that includes a record that you're going through this process for. Okay, so that brings us back to FULCRUM. And again, right now, currently for windstorms, we have two different apps that we would be doing this DEXI process for, one being the STEER non-building, and then the second being the STEER building, again, primarily focused on windstorms here. Okay, we have other apps and other things coming shortly, but currently our handbooks and so on is primarily for the building US windstorm app. Okay, so again, Tracy already gave you an overview of that, but let me jump back to FULCRUM real quick and just demonstrate one of the most important parts is, for example, when we click on a given record, as Tracy showed, that brings up all the information. But as part of the DEXI process, we are going to be then going up here to this edit button. Okay, and so when you edit, it's going to make these fields editable. And one of the things that we can do is immediately, for example, if this was not located at the correct location, we can go to edit location, set the location correctly, again, directly over the structure, and then move on from there. We can also change damage states, etc. So we would move through this process. Okay, so that's how that would work. The other way to do it, if you are not in the map view, if I close out of this, if we're in the list view, the little, what they call the hamburger icon here on the left, if you were to click this and go to edit, that would bring up the same screen, and you can move through that same process. All right. Okay, so for what does the actually consist of? So what is the DEXI process as you go through this? What are you actually doing? So in the non-building app, it's the validation that goes on is fairly limited. You're primarily focused on verifying the location of the record and any basic details, spelling, consistency, and duplicate records, etc. Okay, and we're working on the handbook for this app is currently under development. For the windstorm app, for the building windstorm app, as you can see, there's a lot more information contained. There's almost 100, actually sitting right at 99 fields right now within the windstorm app that is broken down into these individual sections. So during the DEXI process, you're primarily going to be focused on the building attributes, which will pull from either the FULCRUM data, the pictures that are attached, as well as pictometry, realtor websites, the county appraisal websites, pre or post-event street view, all of those to get things like how many stories there are, what's the shape of the roof, and what's the roof cover and wall cladding systems, etc. The structural attributes are often, we have to rely upon what was captured in the field for those. We can pull some information from the photos, but it's typically better to find on site by the investigators. And then you get to the damage levels, which are these individual damage ratios for the building components. And that, again, we're going to rely upon the FULCRUM field notes and photographs, as well as maybe comparison to the NOAA aerials or pictometry, street view, a number of different sources depending on what is available. Okay, so we're going to move through this process, and you can see the DEXI stages that are associated with each. Okay, and so that brings us in to this last, let me mention this last section here, this quality control. So as a VAS member, as you work through this DEXI process, you're going to use these different codes that indicate what stage you are at in the process. Okay, so code 1 essentially means that the location of the address has been verified, so you're 100% sure of where this building is located. 1E would indicate that you've not been able to verify the location. For whatever reason, maybe the photographs are kind of scattered, the GPS was scattered, connectivity wasn't good, and you can't locate the exact structure. This would be a 1E, and we may not go any further with the process, the DEXI process for this record, since we don't know the location of it, and therefore we can't pull any other pull in any of the other supplemental data. And so that the same logic applies then to the subsequent stages. And so as you go through this process, you don't have to do all the stages at one time. Sometimes that may work if you have the data available. Most of the time, we may do, say, stage 1 and 2 first, and then as the UAV data or other supplemental data sources become available, we go back and complete, say, stages 3 and 4, and then ultimately stage 5 when it's curated and published. So it's really going to vary based upon the exact sequence we go through. It's going to vary depending upon the data availability. Okay, so in terms of the kind of the more practical details of it, again, all of the communication related to the DEXI process occurs within Slack. We will set up a dedicated channel, either dedicated to the, within a channel dedicated to the event, or have a separate DEXI channel for that event, where everyone, each VAS member that's involved in the process will be a part of and can ask questions and discuss the process in a way that benefits the entire group as well. Okay, and we found this to be extremely beneficial in coordinating this process for past events as well. All right, so very quickly, I know we're running short on time here, but let me just kind of walk you through for a given record. And let me pick a little bit better one here real quickly. So again, go to my map view, and if we were to pick, again, we could search for the data to look for a specific address or a record ID, or in this case, let me just select a record here. And so if we were to do this here, and I'll go through the editing. So what we would do then is we'd walk through these one at a time. And in this process, it's really helpful to have maybe a second monitor or a second screen, so where you can maybe have the FULCRUM record open in one screen, and then have the pictures, the street view, the other supplemental data available in others. So as we walk through this process, we'd have all this data available to us, and we'd simply be validating or inputting the information is there. So for the building type, again, we'd be inputting and defining that, number of stories, year built from the property appraiser websites, and so on. And so as you go through this process, there is going to be if I can, just close out of it. So there's the handbook that I had pulled up here that would have showed you what, for every single field as you go through, it gives a brief description of that field and some recommendations on how to choose between the different options that are there. And we try to make this as informative as possible. But if you still have questions, then put it in Slack, and the VAS lead would be able to answer and further direct you from there. So it'd be walking through each of these, and as we get to it, for example, if we were looking at the roof shape, then we could, for example, for this structure, we've got the location of it. We could pull it up in here, and if I get my orientation right, I believe that's this structure over here. And so if we are either using Potry or other things, we can find the specific structure that we are interested in, and can again find the different attributes and so on associated with it from the supplemental data or from the photos that were included within FULCRUM. Okay, so you'd walk through this whole process, and maybe you're not able to fill them all out at one time. You're still missing some data, and so you come down here to the end, quality control tracking, and you would put your name here or your initials here, and then update the code to be based upon how far you've gotten within the process. Once you're done, you would hit the check mark, which would save your progress. Notice there's also a notes field here. If there's any questions you have about the, or some undue uncertainty or anything unique about it that you'd want to note here or would be good for someone else coming behind you to know, you can write that in here and leave it as a free text field. All right, so I'm just going to close out of this for now, though. And with that brief overview, let me go back here for sake of time. So very quickly, again, stay tuned. We're going to have some more opportunities for some more targeted webinars about the exact DEXI process. Do review the member guidelines, the VAST handbook, both the report preparation as well as this data enrichment and quality assurance process. Again, verify your Slack account's active. That's all our communication will be done through that. Verify access to the shared Google Drive. And then again, with FULCRUM, make sure you have an account set up if you're going to be a part of this process and are familiar with how it works. All right, and then lastly, watch for the VAST has been activated already in response to DORIAN, and so if you're able to be involved in that, do let us know and sign up on the form, and we will get you started from there. All right, so with that, let me just kind of leave this up here and mention that there is a hands-on training activity that we set up as well. So if you log into FULCRUM and access this training app here, that's the exact same fields as the full Windstorm app. In this case, though, you will only be able to see the record that you have been assigned. And what we'd like you to do is basically follow the DEXI handbook, go through this process using some of these supplemental data sources, and just test it out. Okay, give us some feedback on things that that maybe are a little bit confusing, you're not sure about, and then we'll be able to review your record as well and make sure we don't have any questions or suggestions as well. Okay, so here's a couple of the supplementary data sources that you might want to refer to as you go through that process. All right, so with that, we ran a little bit over here, but let me turn it over to Dave Pravat and for any questions that we may have.
Okay, thank you, David. Everyone's hearing me. I have not seen any questions pop up in the chat so far. So if you have any thoughts or questions that you would like to identify, please address it now. As Tracy said at the beginning, we are in fact going to be issuing the VAST has already been issued, as well as a FAST, given what we see coming up from DORIAN. And particularly people in the Southeast and around Florida in general, we are actually going to be looking to reach out to you and see how best we can mobilize. We do know that the NEAR group is also mobilized, and our local team of University of Florida's towers, they are going to be deploying, as well as Texas Tech is on its way here. So again, the essence of STEER is structural engineers working together to present and to produce sustainable communities by studying what has failed and learning from it. So with that, if there are no questions, perhaps I can ask Tracy to close out within the last 3 or 4 minutes that we have.
Yeah, thanks so much to both Davids for your help with this webinar. In terms of housekeeping on my part, we will receive the recording from Design Safe usually within about 24 hours of the webinar, so hopefully we'll get that before they close for Labor Day weekend. I will immediately post the slides to the Google Drive, so you'll be able to access them there. As we said, there are some great training opportunities afterwards that you can engage in through the Fulcrum training assignments that you'll find when you log into Fulcrum, so we hope you'll take advantage of that to practice some of what you learned today. And we certainly hope we will see you registering for the VAST for DORIAN, because we are going to need help from everything that we can see. From the way the storm is shaping up, it's going to be a challenging Labor Day for a lot of our friends in the Southeast, and we want to do our best as STEER to be ready to stand with them and support them in every way that we can. So I don't see any more questions posting to the chat. So with that, I think we'll get busy getting preparations for DORIAN underway. And as we start mobilizing the VAST, I hope to be engaging more of you on Slack heading into the weekend. So signing off from STEER, thank you for joining us. And this concludes our webinar for today.